Hello, everyone. Before we get started, make sure to like and subscribe and leave a comment saying where you're from and when you watched. That way, YouTube will continue to show you stories like this. Now, let's get started. Asterisk, I still remember. That night, a normal evening like any other, but it became a terrifying milestone that changed my whole life. Outside, the sky was grey, the rain was pattering on the roof. The sound of the wind whistling through the cracks of the door sounded like distant whispers. I sat alone in the living room, the light from the yellow table lamp reflected on the cold, damp wall. The house was old. The creaking sounds of the wood every time the wind blew through always made me feel uneasy. That night, I just wanted to finish reading the unfinished book and go to sleep. But something strange happened, something that, until now, I am still not sure if it belonged to reality or a vivid nightmare. Around midnight, I heard a knock on the door. At first it was light, like the sound of rain hitting a wooden door. But gradually it got stronger, more urgent, as if someone was pleading. I stood up, an indescribable feeling rising in my heart, both curious and afraid. Rarely did anyone come by at that hour in this neighborhood, and if it were a neighbor, they would have called first. I stepped out the door, my heart pounding, my palms cold and sweaty. When I opened the door, the dim light from the porch revealed a face that made me freeze. It was my own face, but older, gaunt eyes filled with panic. The man, who resembled me in every detail, his lips trembled as he uttered words that I still cannot forget. He said he was me from the future. His voice was choked, hurried, as if there was not much time left. He grabbed my hand, squeezing so hard that I felt like my bones were about to break. There was despair and utter fear in his eyes, as if he had just witnessed something horrible beyond imagination. He begged me to leave the house immediately, repeating the same words over and over again, like someone struggling in a nightmare. I stepped back, bewildered and stunned. It was all too surreal to believe, yet too real to be a dream. I looked at the man, his scarred face and tired eyes, and I couldn't deny the chilling resemblance. He was telling me that I wasn't allowed to sleep in the house tonight, that something terrible was about to happen. His voice was shaky and broken, blending with the sound of the rain and wind, creating a scene that was both tragic and terrifying. I tried to ask him why, but every time I opened my mouth, he just shook his head, his trembling lips uttering incomprehensible fragments of sentences. At times, I heard words like blood, screams, darkness. At that moment, an instinctive fear rose in my heart, as if an invisible hand was squeezing my chest. I wanted to believe it was just a sick joke, but the despair in his eyes was too real to deny. The house suddenly became unusually cold. The air was thick. My breath came out like white smoke. I felt like there were dozens of invisible eyes watching from the darkness inside the house. The door behind me creaked. Then the sound of footsteps echoed softly from the floor above. I knew for sure that I lived alone. No one could be there, but the sound still echoed down, slow, heavy, as if someone else was quietly moving. I looked towards the stairs. My heart stopped beating. The man who called himself me from the future suddenly grabbed my shoulder, his eyes filled with panic. He said for the last time that if I didn't leave now, I would never have a chance to escape again. His voice broke like a last wish. Then, in a blink of an eye, he disappeared as if he had never existed. I was stunned, fell to the floor, my head spinning. The footsteps upstairs continued, more regular, closer. The house suddenly became like a giant coffin, trapping me between fear and madness. I wanted to run, but my feet were glued to the cold wooden floor. The wind whistled through the cracks of the door like a ghostly laugh. The rain pattered like a funeral drum. I heard a soft breathing coming from the stairs, long and creepy. A thought flashed through my mind that maybe what the man said was true, and I only had a few minutes before that terrible thing happened. I turned my head to look out the porch. The rain was pouring, the darkness was thick. Inside the house, every small sound became like a knife cutting into my nerves. I longed to rush out, but the shock still held me tight. I clearly felt an invisible presence approaching, something not belonging to this world, lurking in the very house I once thought safe. And when the footsteps stopped at the bottom of the stairs, the darkness seemed to swallow every ray of light in the room. I knew that tonight would be like no other night before. I stood frozen in the living room, my eyes glued to the darkness of the stairs. The footsteps had just stopped, causing the house to fall into a suffocating silence. I could clearly hear my heart beating rapidly, cold sweat dripping down my forehead. I wanted to believe that what had just happened was just a tired hallucination, but all my senses screamed that something was really present. The air became thick. Each breath seemed to be blocked in my throat. I trembled as I stepped back, my eyes not leaving the darkness on the stairs. Just for a moment, I saw a slight movement, as if someone had just retreated back, disappearing into the night. I quickly turned on the ceiling light, the pale yellow light shining down, but it seemed unable to penetrate the gloom that enveloped the house. The stairs were still silent, empty, but the feeling that someone was watching me had never been so strong. In that moment, I remembered the warning of the man who claimed to be me from the future. He had begged me to leave, begged me to run. If it really was me, he knew what was waiting. Thinking about it, I felt even more fear creeping into me, but my legs wouldn't move. Part of me wanted to run, but another part of me was compelled to know what was happening in this house. I decided to move towards the stairs. Each step felt twice as heavy, the wood creaking under my feet like a groan. The air grew colder as I approached, my breath coming out in a misty mist. I stopped at the foot of the stairs, looking up into the darkness. Each step seemed to turn into a gaping mouth, waiting to swallow whoever dared to enter. I took a deep breath, my hand trembling on the railing. Suddenly, from above came a low, distorted laugh, unlike any human voice. I recoiled, my heart about to burst. I tried to calm myself down, thinking it might be the wind, but deep down I knew better. No wind could make such a sound. It was the laughter of someone hiding, mocking my weakness. I quickly grabbed the flashlight on the table, turned it on, and shone it straight up. The beam of light swept over the steps, sweeping along the upstairs hallway, but there was no sign of anyone. Only a bedroom door was slightly open, shaking slightly as if someone had just walked through. The feeling of being pressed made me unable to stay downstairs any longer. I decided to go up and check, otherwise I wouldn't be able to sleep. Each step under my feet seemed to shake, my heart pounding more than ever. When I reached the upper floor, I clearly felt an unusual coldness, as if I had entered another world. The flashlight's light trembled and shone on the half-open door. I slowly approached, gently pushing it open. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, empty room. But on the wall, I noticed long, winding scratches, like traces of claws digging into the wood. A cold wind blew by, extinguishing the flashlight. I frantically pressed the button repeatedly, but to no avail. In the pitch-black darkness, I heard slow footsteps behind me, each step heavy and deliberate. I stood frozen, not daring to turn around. Some invisible hand lightly touched my shoulder, cold to the point of numbness. I screamed, turned around, but saw no one. The hallway was empty, shrouded in darkness. I backed away, my heart pounding. Then suddenly behind me came a whisper close to my ear. A hoarse voice said that I had been followed for a long time. I flung open the window, hoping to find some light from outside. But all I saw was the yard flooded with rain, and in the corner of the garden, under the tree, there was a figure standing motionless, looking up. The flash of lightning clearly illuminated that face. I was stunned. It was still me, but the face was horribly distorted. The eyes were white. The blinking stopped. The figure disappeared. I fell to my knees. My legs had no strength left. Everything I had just witnessed made me realize that I was trapped in a living nightmare. One of those horror stories with no way out. The house was silent again, but the silence was more terrifying than the noise. I listened, and in the sound of the rain, I heard the breathing of someone still standing nearby, only I could not see. And I understood that warning was never a joke. I only had two choices: leave this place immediately, or stay and face the thing that was lurking in the darkness, the thing that had been waiting for me for a long time. I trudged back to the living room, the whispers I had heard upstairs still echoing in my head. The house was in a deathly silence, except for the sound of rain hitting the glass doors. I wanted to run outside immediately, but my legs seemed to no longer obey. An invisible force held me back, forcing me to face what was happening. I told myself that maybe I was hallucinating, that it was all just a trick of my mind. But when my eyes accidentally stopped at the mirror hanging on the wall, all my thoughts shattered in the mirror. I saw myself standing there, my face pale with fear. But after just a blink, the reflection changed. I still saw myself, but the other face was stretched out and distorted. The eyes were black and empty. The mouth of the mirror's self slowly curved into a sinister smile, while the real me stood still, lips trembling, unable to form words. I backed away, but the image did not disappear. Instead, it fixed its eyes on me, then slowly raised its hand, tapping the mirror from the inside. The clacking sound echoed in the room, sending a chill down my spine. I rushed forward, intending to cover the mirror, but as soon as my hand touched it, a cold air blew out, prickling my skin. The image in the mirror opened its mouth, not making a sound, but I could read every word through the movement of its lips. It said that I could not escape, that everything was predestined. I panicked, jerked back, and hit the chair hard. The chair fell down. The sound echoed throughout the room, but was immediately swallowed by the heavy silence. The face in the mirror gradually disappeared, leaving only my normal reflection, gaunt and trembling. I wanted to scream, but my throat was tight. I knew clearly that I had just experienced one of those ghost stories that did not belong to this world. Outside, thunder and lightning tore across the sky. In the flash of lightning, I saw a shadow of a person passing by outside the window. I rushed forward, looking out into the rainy yard, but there was no one. There was only darkness and streaks of rainwater glistening on the glass. But then, a hand clearly imprinted on the window from outside, long, crooked fingers that seemed not to be human. I was stunned. My heart felt like it was being squeezed. The hand pressed harder, leaving a mark on the glass, then disappeared as if it had never existed. I stepped back, trying to calm down, but everything around me became more and more unfamiliar. The old walls in the house seemed to be breathing heavily, emitting a soft groan. The table lamp flickered continuously, the flickering light creating strange shapes on the wall. I felt like the house had turned into a living entity, trapping me in its game. And I understood the initial warning was not wrong. I was trapped in a space where the boundary between reality and the underworld had been erased. I decided to find a way out. I ran towards the main door, my hands shaking as I turned the latch. But the door felt heavy, as if it was being blocked by some force. I pulled, I jerked, I even banged, but it didn't budge. The howling wind outside sounded like mocking laughter. I turned around. The room was dark, shadows lurking in every corner. In my head, there was only one thought, that I was facing an inevitable end. Suddenly, I heard small footsteps coming from behind me. I turned around, but saw no one. Then, a familiar voice rang out from the void. It was my voice, but deeper, more distorted. It said that I would die here, tonight. I trembled and fell to the floor, hands covering my ears, but could not block out the creepy laughter. I realized that maybe my future had really come, but it had not come to save me. It had only come to drown me in darkness along with this house. As the lightning streaked across the sky again, the shadows in the mirror turned their heads to look straight at me. All of them had my face, but distorted, full of malice. I screamed in despair, but my voice was drowned out by the rumble of thunder. And I knew this was only the beginning of the horrors that awaited me. The living room suddenly felt more cramped, as if the walls were closing in. I tried to calm myself, but the cold air and eerie silence made me suffocate. I heard soft tapping sounds coming from all directions, sometimes near, sometimes far, as if dozens of invisible hands were tapping a ghostly rhythm on each piece of wood. I tried to convince myself that it was just the rain or the wind, but the steady, deliberate rhythm betrayed all rational reasoning. I looked around the house. Everything familiar suddenly became strange. The sofa, the wooden table, the curtains were all stained with ominous darkness. I walked towards the main door again, tried to turn the handle, but it was stiff, as if sealed from the outside. I pounded on the door, the echoing sound becoming a long echo, like the drumbeat of a dark ritual. I turned around and saw a small crack on the wall. Slowly spreading dot from that crack, a cold air blew out, accompanied by a hoarse groan as if from the ground. I shivered, retreating, but could not take my eyes off. Darkness gradually crept out from the crack, forming distorted shapes like arms reaching out. I threw any object in that direction, but when I touched it, the darkness immediately swallowed the object, leaving no trace. A feeling of dizziness enveloped me. I realized that I had entered the territory of an incomprehensible force. Footsteps echoed again, this time not just from the stairs, but from all over the house. The ceiling creaked, the wooden floor shook, and I heard a simultaneous whisper, dozens of voices mixed together. They were unclear, but I felt hatred and malice in every breath. I gathered all my courage, stepped back close to the wall, clutching the flashlight despite the weak light. In that moment, I saw my own silhouette appear in the hallway, then disappear just as I was about to step forward. I began to suspect that the house was no longer a shelter, but a trap, a gateway to something darker. Every corner seemed to contain a psychological trap that gradually made me lose control. I was no longer sure if I heard anything real or if it was just a hallucination. But as I collapsed on the floor, trying to calm myself, a familiar voice rang right in my ear. It whispered that I had been here too long, that this house had chosen me. I panicked and rushed towards the stairs. hoping to find a way out through the upper floor window. As I stepped onto the first step, the space suddenly swayed, as if the house itself had turned into an endless maze. The stairs grew longer, the steps continued endlessly. The light above turned into a distant dim spot. I climbed on and on, my heart pounding, sweat pouring, but still could not see the end. Suddenly, from below came a scream, my own voice, full of pain and despair. I froze, not daring to continue. I turned my head to look down and saw countless shadows climbing up behind me. All of them had my face, but horribly deformed, eyes white, mouths wide open. I screamed in vain, rushing towards the top, but the more I ran, the more I felt like I was just spinning in a loop with no way out. Finally, I was forced to stop when the stairs disappeared under my feet, letting me fall straight into the dark void. When I woke up, I found myself still in the living room, as if I had never left. But everything around me was strange, as if covered by a thin layer of dust, and on the wall appeared many new scratches. I suddenly understood. I had just gone through a round of trials of this house, a cruel game of the spirits residing inside, and now I was no longer sure if I could escape or would forever become a part of the endless haunted stories. I sat down on the living room floor, my head in my hands, trying to find some sense of order in the chaos. The house was no longer the same place I had lived in. It felt alive, breathing, watching me with dozens of invisible eyes. Every creak of wood, every draft of wind through the cracks of the door was a lurking whisper. I knew I had to leave, but the door was locked and other escape routes seemed to have disappeared. I felt like I was trapped in a giant box where every corner held a deadly secret. Suddenly, footsteps echoed from upstairs again, this time more urgent, stronger, as if someone was running around the house hunting me. I held my breath, clutching the weak flashlight, its shaky light bouncing off the mottled walls. The running stopped abruptly, replaced by a terrible silence. Then, from the void, my voice rang out, so clear it sent a chill down my spine. It called my name, over and over again, hoarse and drawn out, like an echo from a deep well. I jumped up, spun around the room, but saw no one. The voice still echoed, this time from the window. I moved closer, the flashlight beam hitting the rain-stained glass, and in a flash, I saw a face pressed against the glass. It was my face, but pale and distorted. The eyes were lifeless. I screamed, stepped back, dropping the flashlight. In an instant, the light went out. Darkness swallowed me. I quickly groped to pick up the flashlight, turned it on, but the room was empty. There was no face outside the window. There was only the sound of rain and wind. But my heart knew clearly what I saw was not an illusion. I even felt the cold air blowing from outside the glass, as if the figure really existed. I started to shake, trying to convince myself that it was all just a cruel joke of my mind. But deep down, I knew this was one of those scary stories that had gone beyond the realm of imagination. I decided to check the upper floor once more. I walked up the stairs, the wooden steps creaking as if in warning. When I reached the hallway, I found all the doors wide open, whereas I remembered them being closed. It was pitch black inside, a cold wind blowing from each room, carrying a faint whisper. I gathered up all my courage and walked into the bedroom, which used to be my peaceful resting place. But now, the room looked like someone had destroyed it. The bed was askew, the pillows were scattered, and there were fresh scratches on the walls. Suddenly, the door behind me slammed shut. I ran towards it in a panic, but couldn't open it. In the darkness, I heard steady breathing, close to my ear. I turned around, flashing the flashlight around the room, but saw no one. There was only a large mirror in the corner. In the mirror, I saw myself again, but this time I was smiling, a horrible, distorted smile, while the real me was shivering. The image in the mirror raised its hand to greet me, then suddenly stretched its hand out, as if to pull me inside. I screamed loudly, rushed to smash the mirror. The pieces fell all over the floor, reflecting dozens of my distorted faces, staring at me at the same time. I almost lost my mind, trying to kick the door open and rush out into the hallway. But when the door opened, I realized the hallway was no longer the same. It stretched on forever, the faint light from the flickering lights hanging on the walls. I walked in fear. Each echo of my own footsteps sounded like dozens of others were following closely behind. And then the familiar voice rang out again, this time whispering in my head. It told me that I would never escape, that I had entered the realm of my own darkness. I held my head, screaming in vain, the screams echoing down the endless hallway. But no one answered, only distorted laughter echoed from all sides. I understood that, whether in dream or reality, I had become the prey of an invisible force. And this house, now, had become a living tomb, where I could be imprisoned forever. The endless corridor, the flickering yellow light above, made me feel like I was trapped in a nightmare with no way out. I walked, my feet heavy, my heart pounding. Each step I took echoed strangely, as if dozens of other feet were moving behind me, imitating my every move. I stopped. Everything fell silent. But in just a short moment, the sound rang out again, this time no longer in sync with my rhythm, but as if someone was getting closer. I turned my head, the flickering light clearly illuminating the empty corridor. But in the flickering of the light bulb, I saw distorted shadows pressed against the wall. They had no faces, just dark shapes, but sometimes, in the flash, I recognized my face appearing in them, distorted with a monstrous smile. I trembled, retreating backwards, but the corridor continued on and on, with no way out. I began to wonder if I had entered another dimension where all the rules of reality had disappeared. The whispers rang out again, this time from multiple directions. They were not sentences, just murmurs, as if discussing my fate. I pressed my hands to my ears, trying to block them out, but the sound penetrated straight into my head, making me ache. My eyes blurred, and when I opened them, I realized that the walls on either side had disappeared, replaced by hundreds of wooden doors lining the hallway. Each door was slightly open, and from inside came a faint blue light and a rhythmic knocking sound. I gathered my courage and walked towards one of the doors. Just as I was about to open it, the door swung open, revealing a pitch-black room. In the darkness, I saw myself huddled in the corner, my face pale, my eyes bloodshot. That version stared at me and chuckled, the laughter echoing down the hallway. I slammed the door shut in panic, but the laughter continued to echo, spreading to the other doors. Then each door shook violently, as if hundreds of people like me were smashing inside, trying to get out. I ran, rushing forward, but the hallway never ended. I felt every hair on the back of my neck stand up, as the footsteps, chasing after me, became clearer. I turned back, and saw dark, tall figures moving as fast as the wind. They had no eyes, but I could still feel the disgusting gazes directed at me. I screamed in despair, rushed forward, and suddenly the last door appeared. I didn't have time to think. Immediately pushed it open and stepped inside. Inside was an empty room, only a large mirror standing in the middle of the floor. I approached, breathing heavily. In the mirror, I saw myself, but this time it was different. I was standing there, my face covered in blood, my eyes filled with despair. The version reached out to touch the glass, then whispered something. I tried to listen, but only caught a few broken words like dead, stuck, forever. I trembled and stepped back, but the hand in the mirror suddenly penetrated the glass. Cold and stiff, touching my shoulder, I screamed, rushed out of the room, but when I turned back, the door was gone. Only the wall was bare. I collapsed, gasping for breath, tears welling up in my eyes from despair. I began to wonder if I was still sane. Everything was too much, and the thought that I might be stuck here forever almost suffocated me. I could no longer tell what was real and what was imaginary in that moment. The raucous laughter rang out again, right next to my ear. I turned and saw a face exactly like mine, but empty and soulless, staring back. It whispered once more that I could not escape, and I knew from this moment on, I had officially become a part of the creepy stories that this house had nurtured for generations. I leaned against the cold wall, my whole body trembling with exhaustion. My rapid breathing mixed with the sound of the pouring rain outside made the space even more stifling. I thought I had escaped the room with the evil mirror, but the scene before my eyes proved that everything was not over. The hallway disappeared, replaced by a completely unfamiliar row of rooms. The walls were stained with dark red blood, the floor was wet and cold, and the strong stench made me want to vomit. I tried to stand up, walking slowly in that creepy space. The sound of dripping water echoed from somewhere, each drop falling like a count of fate. I suddenly heard a dragging sound on the floor, as if something heavy was being dragged. The sound grew closer and closer, then stopped when I stopped. I held my breath, sweeping the flashlight around the room. The shaky light swept across the wall, and I saw the lines of scribbled words in blood. They wrote my name over and over, so densely that it covered the entire surface. A chill ran down my spine, my hands shaking so much I almost dropped the flashlight. Part of me wanted to turn away, pretend I hadn't seen anything, but my eyes stopped at a half-open door. From inside, a soft whisper echoed. I moved closer, pressing my ear to the crack. The whisper was clearly my voice, but hoarse and full of pain. It repeated words I'd heard many times tonight. Dead, trapped, forever. I backed away, my heart pounding like it was about to burst out of my chest. Suddenly, the door swung open. Inside, I saw a dark room with an old bed. On the bed lay a body lying motionless, its face turned to the side. As I moved closer, the flashlight beam revealed that it was me, eyes wide open, mouth agape, as if I wanted to scream but couldn't. I panicked and fell to the floor. The body on the bed suddenly jerked, sat up, and its white eyes stared straight at me. I screamed, jumped up, and ran out of the room. But the hallway door had disappeared, replaced by a solid wall. I pounded hard, my hands were bleeding, but the wall was cold as iron. Behind me, the sound of dragging footsteps began to echo. I turned my head to look, and the other body had stood up, slowly approaching. Each step left a clear blood trail on the floor. I screamed in panic, searching for an escape, but to no avail. I rushed to another door, hoping to find a way out. But inside was only an empty room with 4 smooth walls. I was locked, no windows, no way out. In a moment of despair, I collapsed, tears streaming down. And then, a familiar voice rang out right behind me. I turned my head, and saw myself, but thin, with sunken eyes, a face covered in blood. He looked at me, smiled crookedly, and said, "You can't escape, because it's all happened." I felt the world spinning, my mind blank. I tried to deny it, telling myself that this was just an illusion. But the cold feeling from his hand on my shoulder was real. I trembled, not daring to move, while he whispered in my ear. The sound was exactly like my voice, but contained indescribable pain and despair. I understood that I was stuck in a terrible loop, where I constantly faced dead versions of myself. In my despair, I realized a more horrifying truth. These were not just virtual images. These were fragments of my future, the endings that I could not avoid. And this house, with all its haunting and darkness, was just a tool for me to witness my own fate. As that thought crossed my mind, I knew that this was no longer a fictional story, but one of those true, scary stories that had begun to consume my life. I stood frozen in the middle of the room, filled with a fishy smell, heavy breathing echoing in the dark space. The figure that had just touched my shoulder disappeared, leaving an eerie silence. I tried to step out, but when I opened the door, the scene in front of me was no longer the old hallway. Instead, it was a completely different house, as if I had just stepped into a parallel reality. The walls were mottled, the windows were broken, and the cold wind whistled through every crack, carrying a groan that seemed to come from the underworld. I walked slowly, each step heavy. In the corner of the house, a chair swayed gently, although there was no wind. On the chair was an old doll, its glass eyes broken, still staring at me. I stepped back, my heart pounding, but the doll suddenly tilted its head, its neck joints making a cracking sound, then smiled faintly. I hurried away, but the creaking sound of the chair still followed me around the room, as if it were watching my every move. I walked through a long hallway, where the flickering light from the broken bulb cast long, distorted shadows. The shadows did not match my body. They moved more slowly, sometimes stopping while I continued walking. Once, when I turned my head to look straight, I saw my shadow standing still, then slowly waving my hand. I was startled, rushing towards the end of the hallway, but there was no way out, only a rotten wooden door. I pushed hard, entering a larger room. In the middle of the room was a long, dusty table, on which were placed dozens of old photos. I approached, my heart gradually turning cold when I realized that in all the photos were me, at different ages, at different moments, including memories I had never experienced. Some of the photos even had dates written on them, and even days that were yet to come in the future. I shakily picked up one of them, and when I looked more closely, I saw that behind the version of myself in the photo there was always a tall, dark shadow lurking. I dropped the photo on the floor, my heart pounding. At that moment, all the candles in the room lit up at the same time, the flickering flames creating ghostly shapes on the wall. The photos shook, then flew off the table one by one, sticking to the walls around me, surrounding me. In each photo, my face gradually distorted, my eyes were empty, my mouth gaping as if screaming. I held my head, screaming in despair, but my own voice echoed throughout the room, mixed with the distorted laughter from nowhere. Suddenly, the floor beneath my feet shook, and from the cracks in the wood, pale hands reached out, flailing as if trying to pull me down. I struggled, retreating, but the more I retreated, the more hands appeared. They touched my feet, cold and slimy, making me shiver in horror. I tried to escape, rushing towards the door, but the door slammed shut. I turned around and looked around. The hands had withdrawn, leaving the floor intact as if nothing had happened. I collapsed, my whole body exhausted. The room gradually darkened, only a candle flickering in the corner. In that weak light, I saw a figure standing motionless. As the candle flared brighter, I realized it was me, but thin, haggard, with empty eyes. That version said nothing, just slowly raised a hand to his lips, signaling silence. Then, in the next moment, he disappeared, leaving me alone in the deadly room. I trembled to realize I was no longer in my house, but trapped in another place where haunted stories became cruel truth. The last candle in the room suddenly went out. Darkness swallowed everything around me. I gasped, my hands groping in the void, my heart pounding as if it wanted to break out of my chest. The silence was so thick that every breath I made sounded like a scream. I stepped back and my foot touched something hard. Bending down in the darkness, I realized it was a photo frame. I picked it up, and when the light flashed from outside the window, I froze. In the photo frame was me, pale face, eyes wide open, lying motionless in this very room. I dropped the photo frame, my hand shaking. Before my eyes, dozens of other photo frames appeared on the wall at the same time. In them, countless horrifying scenes, all revolving around me. In one, I saw myself being pulled down by pale hands. In another, I lay on the floor, covered in blood. In another, I disappeared into a sea of dense darkness. Each photo was like a peek into the future, a death foretold. I trembled, holding my head, screaming in despair. My scream echoed throughout the room. But the only response was a distorted laughter, echoing from all sides. I spun around, trying to find the source of the sound. Suddenly, the opposite wall cracked, slowly widening into a gap. From it, a skinny hand reached out, dragging a skinny body out. In the dim light, I realized it was myself again, but the body was rotting, the flesh was peeling. He looked at me with empty eyes, then opened his mouth to let out a hoarse voice. He told me that I was witnessing fragments of my own future, that all of those outcomes would happen, I just didn't know when. He laughed, a creepy laugh that made my whole body shiver. I backed away, but the wall behind me had disappeared. I fell into the void, falling into another room. When I opened my eyes, I saw a circle of mirrors in front of me, surrounding me in the middle. In each mirror, I saw a different version of myself, all distorted, all with despair on their faces. I walked towards one mirror. The version in it approached me at the same time, but then suddenly pulled its hand away from the glass. A cold hand tightened its grip on my wrist, pulling me to the other side. I screamed, struggling in despair. The other mirrors also began to shake, hands reaching out from within them. I was surrounded by dozens of versions of myself, all wanting to pull me into their world. I screamed, using all my strength to break free and smash the mirror in front of me. The shards flew everywhere, reflecting countless ghostly eyes. I fell to the floor, exhausted, while the hands gradually withdrew. The room became quiet again, only me lying there gasping for breath in the middle of the circle of broken mirrors. In that moment, I suddenly understood that everything I was experiencing was not an illusion, but a cruel truth. I had seen my own death, not once, but many times, in many different scenarios. And this house was forcing me to witness it all. I screamed, begging for someone to wake me up, but to no avail. I could only hear my own echo echoing through the invisible walls. At that moment, from an unbroken mirror, I saw a familiar figure. It was the man who appeared at the door earlier that night, the one who claimed to be me from the future. He looked at me with pity, then said softly, "You were warned, but you didn't listen. Now it's too late." After saying that, his image disappeared. Leaving me alone with the horror, I collapsed, tears mixed with sweat running down my face. I knew that these were not just illusions, but the fate that awaited me. And I realized sometimes death is not as scary as being forced to see it over and over again until my mind gradually breaks. In that cold darkness, I understood that I was living in one of the most terrible true horror stories, and it would never end until I completely disappeared. I sat among the broken mirrors, my breathing quickened, my heart felt like it was about to burst in my chest. The images just now kept repeating in my head like a nightmare that could not end. I felt like I was being watched, surrounded by countless invisible eyes. The silence continued to make me even more desperate, because I knew that at any moment this silence would be torn apart by another terrible thing. I tried to stand up, stepping over the cold, broken mirrors. Under my feet there were cracking sounds, like the sound of broken bones. Each step seemed to awaken a new fear. I walked around the room, looking for an exit, but there were no more doors. All there were 4 bare walls, stained with dark stains. I pressed my hands against the wall, hoping to find a gap, but all I felt was icy coldness, like touching the surface of a grave. Suddenly, I heard a soft but eerie chuckle. I turned my head, the dim light shining into a dark corner where there was an unbroken piece of mirror. In it, I saw my own image, but the eyes were completely black, the mouth stretched to the ears. The image laughed loudly, then raised a finger to its lips to signal silence. My heart pounded. I stepped back, but my feet tripped over the mirror, falling to the floor. When I looked up, the mirror was gone, leaving only a blank wall. I trembled, trying to regain my composure, but then a knock sounded from behind me. I turned around, seeing an old wooden door appear right on the wall that had been completely blank. With no other choice, I walked over, trembling and opening it. The door led to a long, dark, narrow hallway, where the only light came from the flickering candles hanging on the wall. I stepped in, the door behind me slamming shut, the sound echoing through the space, making me shiver. I walked slowly. Each candle suddenly extinguished as I passed, the thick darkness swallowing the path behind me, forcing me to keep going. The familiar whispering rang out again, clearer this time, like dozens of voices speaking at once. They called my name, each word drawn out, the distorted sound echoing as if coming from within my skull. I held my head, squeezing my eyes shut, but I couldn't stop the sounds. When I opened my eyes, I saw distorted shadows standing in rows on both sides of the hallway, all turning to look at me. I walked faster, my heart pounding, but the shadows began to move too. They followed me, keeping a close enough distance, never touching but never letting me go. In the dim light, I realized they all had faces like mine, but twisted versions, with creepy smiles or soulless eyes. I felt like I was leading my own funeral procession, and I was the one being carried away. At the end of the hallway, I saw another door. I rushed forward, pushed it open, and fell into a large room. It was dark inside, except for a chair in the middle of the room. On the chair, I saw myself sitting there again, hands tied, mouth covered, eyes full of panic, pleading for help. I moved closer, my heart aching, but as soon as I touched it, the body disappeared, leaving the ropes hanging loose on the chair. Laughter rang out again, this time right behind me. I turned around, but saw no one, only a horrible emptiness waiting. I fell to my knees, feeling like I could no longer bear it. Each second felt like a sentence, and I understood that what I was experiencing was no longer an illusion, but the cruel truth that this house forced me to face. And the truth is that I can no longer escape this place, where creepy stories are not just told, they live, they breathe, and they are devouring my soul bit by bit. I sat panting in the large room, the silence so loud I could hear my heartbeat. The images, me tied to the chair, myself screaming for help, all disappeared as quickly as a cruel joke. I didn't know how much longer my mind could endure. Every time I believed the nightmare was over, the house revealed another layer of hell. I staggered forward, looking for another door. Finally, on the left side appeared a narrow door, rotten wood. Outside the wind howled. I hesitated for a second and then pushed hard. The door opened, and in front of me was a spiral staircase leading down to the basement. The basement was never a place I wanted to go, but I knew the only way was to keep going. I walked down, each step creaking long, deep down as if leading me into the ground. The musty and rancid smell rushed straight into my nose, making me want to vomit. When I touched the cold ground, the flickering flashlight light revealed a scene that made me numb. Before my eyes were dozens of old coffins lined up all over the basement. Their lids were all slightly open, and it was dark inside. I trembled as I approached. The light shone in, and I realized that each one contained a corpse. But what terrified me was that the faces on all of them were mine. Each corpse had a different shape. Some wore torn clothes, some had blood all over their bodies, some had rotted away, leaving only bones. I staggered, my eyes were dizzy, my hands shook so much that I almost dropped the flashlight. All of them lay motionless, but their white eyes were still wide open, fixed on me. I wanted to run away, but my feet were nailed to the ground. A voice rang out, echoing throughout the basement, not knowing where it came from. It said that this was all the death I would have to go through, over and over again, until I accepted my fate at that moment. One of the corpses in the coffin suddenly moved. It sat up, its neck creaking, its eyes staring blankly at me. I backed away, my heart pounding, but then more corpses sat up at the same time. The sound of stirring echoed throughout the cellar. The stench was overwhelming. I screamed, rushing towards the stairs, but when I turned back, the path had disappeared. Only the thick wall remained. I was trapped. The corpses began to crawl out of the coffin, each step heavy, their eyes never leaving me. The sound of dragging feet made my spine shiver. I spun around looking for an exit, but there was only darkness and faces like mine approaching. I shouted through the flashlight at them, but the light only shone on their distorted faces, then went out. The basement was plunged into absolute darkness. Only whispers could be heard from all sides. They repeated the same phrase over and over again. Forever. Forever. In that moment, I understood that I was not just witnessing an illusion. I was facing my own fate, repeating it over and over again in an inescapable spiral. I shook, holding my head, tears welling up, but the raucous laughter of the corpses drowned out all the sounds. I knew that I had fallen into one of the most brutal, short, scary stories, where every passing minute brought me closer to my predetermined death. The whispers echoed endlessly throughout the basement, driving me insane. I circled around the empty coffins, the stench so thick it felt like it was choking me. I knew that if I didn't find a way out soon, I would be swallowed by those corpses. I pressed against the wall, groping every inch in the darkness, hoping to find some sort of opening. My trembling hand slid across the cold surface until it hit a small crack. I slammed it down, and the wall slowly cracked, revealing a narrow, endless passage. With no other choice, I rushed in. The hallway inside was pitch black, but strangely, I felt an invisible force pulling me. The space narrowed, my breathing became labored. The wall pressed so tightly that I felt like I was being buried alive. I crawled on my hands and feet, my bones cracking from the strain. Finally, I fell into another room. This space was larger, but terrifyingly empty. In the middle of the room was a circle drawn with dried blood, with strange symbols I had never seen before. I stepped closer, my heart pounding as I realized that there was a handprint on the circle, as if someone had crawled out from within. While I was still bewildered, the cold air filled the air, and the candles around the room lit up at the same time. In the flickering light, I saw many silhouettes standing against the wall, motionless, all facing me. I trembled and retreated, but those silhouettes began to move. They had no faces, just blurry human figures, but each step they took echoed heavily. They circled around me, gradually forcing me into the center of the blood circle. I tried to struggle, but my limbs were paralyzed, unable to resist. A strong wind rose, pulling everything into the center of the circle. I screamed loudly, but the sound was quickly swallowed. At that moment, a clearer shape appeared in the middle of the circle. It was me, but my eyes were empty, my mouth gaping as if it wanted to swallow me. He looked at me, his voice echoing in my head instead of out of my mouth. He told me that I was stuck between two worlds, where time and reality were intertwined. This was not a dream, nor an illusion, but a parallel world where my soul was trapped. I tried to deny it, screaming in despair, but the voice continued. It said that every time I saw different versions of myself, it was not just an illusion, but other me's in other worlds, all imprisoned in this endless vortex. I understood a terrifying thing, that this house was not just haunted, but it was a portal between worlds, a place that swallowed all the unfortunate souls who entered. I trembled, trying to escape the circle, but the shadows around me simultaneously reached out, pushing me face down onto the bloody floor. My whole body felt like it was being sucked in, my mind spinning. I looked around one last time and saw the other versions of me standing silently in the darkness, their eyes filled with despair, as if warning me that this path had no return. In that moment, I understood that I had truly fallen into one of the most terrifying paranormal stories, and my fate was now tied to this house forever. I lay motionless in the circle of blood, feeling as if an invisible force was pinning my body to the cold ground. The figures around me were no longer just blurry shadows. They began to move, each gesture jerky, distorted, like cartoon characters out of sync. Each joint creaked, arms bent at unnatural angles. They staggered closer, mouths smiling from ear to ear, eyes wide open and soulless. The distorted laughter rang out simultaneously, bustling like a horror song. I felt goosebumps on my skin, every hair standing on end. Each of their footsteps echoed throughout the room, like the drumbeat of a ghostly parade. I tried to struggle to escape the circle, but my limbs felt like they were chained tightly by invisible ropes. The smell of blood in the air grew stronger and stronger, rushing straight into my brain. Suddenly, one of those figures rushed towards me, so fast that my eyes could not follow. It stopped right in front of me, its face so close that I could feel its cold breath. Its lips moved, but the sound that came out was not words, but a piercing screech, like metal scraping against glass. I felt a sharp pain in my head, clutching my ears, but the screech kept ringing, reverberating straight into my bones. Other shadows also began to rush forward, surrounding me from all sides. Each skinny hand touched my body, cold as ice. I felt like a puppet on strings, every muscle tensed, unable to control my movements. I was forced to stand up, my body stiff, my limbs jerking as if someone was controlling me. In that moment, I realized I was becoming a part of them, a living puppet controlled in the gruesome dance of the blood circle. They began to spin around me, dancing wildly, each twisting movement distorting the room. I was drawn into that vortex, moving with them without being able to resist. Laughter and the sound of bones cracking combined into a terrifying song. I screamed, trying to regain control, but in vain. In each shadow's face, I saw myself, but distorted, gaunt, with soulless eyes. I suddenly understood these shadows were pieces of my soul torn apart, turned into cursed puppets. In my despair, I saw a dimly lit door appear in the corner of the room. I used all my strength to resist the vortex that was pulling me. Step by step, I tried to drag my body towards the door while the puppets around me screamed, trying to hold me back. I fell down many times, blood oozing from the scratches on my skin, but I still crawled. When I was about to reach the doorknob, one of the shadows rushed forward, squeezing my neck. I suffocated, my eyes blurred, almost giving up in the last moment. I used all my remaining strength, slamming my hand on the door. The door swung open, blinding light flooded in, engulfing the room. The screams of the shadows rang out deafeningly and then disappeared. I fell out, my body aching, my breathing rapid. But when I raised my head, I realized I was in another house, still old, still dark, but completely unfamiliar. And I knew this cycle of horror was not over. I had just escaped one of countless hells. I was living in one of the most cruel animated horror stories, and the one who wrote it was my fate. The light from the door that had just opened quickly went out, leaving me in another dark and cold house. I collapsed to the floor, my whole body aching as if all my strength had been sucked out. When I raised my head, my eyes gradually adjusted to the darkness. I realized that the surroundings were suspiciously quiet. There was no more laughter, no more whispers, no more invisible hands clinging to me. It was just me, alone in the strange house, with a thick silence that was more terrifying than any sound. I walked carefully, the old wooden floor creaking under my feet. The surrounding walls were covered with dust, thick with cobwebs. I glanced around, trying to find a window or an exit, but everything was covered with rotten wooden boards. The musty air made my chest heavy. Each breath became difficult. I trembled as I realized I was in the nightmare that many people feared most, home alone. Alone in a house with no way out. I groped down the hallway, the light from the old flashlight still in my pocket. The weak light shone on the wall, where long, crooked handprints appeared, imprinted like dried blood. I shivered, trying to ignore it, but my heart beat faster. I heard a soft tapping sound from the ceiling, then footsteps moving slowly above me. I looked up, my throat tightening. This house was not empty. I was not really alone. I decided not to climb the stairs, but instead turned into a nearby room. The door creaked open, revealing an old kitchen. Broken dishes were scattered on the floor, the wooden table was rotten, and the refrigerator was ajar, dark inside. I moved closer, shining the flashlight inside. There was no food in the fridge, only torn black and white photos. I picked one up, the light clearly illuminating the face in the photo. I was stunned when I realized it was me, my face smeared with blood, my eyes white. I dropped the photo, fell to the ground, and suddenly heard footsteps behind me. I turned around, but the room was still empty. My heart was pounding, my hand gripping the flashlight as if it were my last lifeline. In the darkness, the kitchen door slammed shut, locked from the outside. I was locked in the room, completely alone. The space was terrifyingly silent, except for my own rapid breathing. A knock sounded from the kitchen cabinet, 3 clear knocks, as if someone was locked inside. I approached, trembling as I opened the cabinet door. There was no one inside, only a small, cracked mirror reflecting my terrified face. But in that moment, the face in the mirror did not move with me, but stared at me and smiled strangely. I screamed, threw the mirror to the ground, but instead of breaking, it disappeared. The space fell into silence again, leaving me extremely confused. I sat down on the kitchen floor, my hands shaking, holding my head. I knew for sure that this house was playing with me, forcing me to face the ultimate fear of being alone. With each passing second, the feeling of someone standing in the dark watching me became more and more obvious. I took a deep breath, telling myself that if I did not escape, I would suffocate in this silence. I stood up, banged on the door, and screamed for help. But in response, there was only a cold echo, and the thick darkness was swallowing all hope. I understood that I had fallen into one of the most terrifying Home Alone, and tonight was only the beginning. The sound of the rain hitting the glass door made the whole house shake. I sat on the kitchen floor, my heart pounding, cold sweat mixed with tears rolling down my face. I felt like all the sounds in the house had disappeared. Only the sound of the rain beating steadily echoed, each drop falling like a funeral drum. In that moment, the sound of the rain was no longer peaceful, but like a reminder of the fate that awaited me. I stood up, trembling as I approached the window. Outside, the rain poured down. The thick curtain of water made it impossible for me to see anything but darkness. I pressed my ear to the glass, clearly hearing the sound of the rain hitting the outside, mixed with the long, cold howl of the wind. But then, in the midst of that chaotic sound, I noticed a different rhythm. It was not like the sound of normal rain, but like the tapping of a hand. I was startled, stepped back, my eyes glued to the glass doorframe in a flash of lightning. I saw a figure standing on the porch, motionless in the rain. The figure was thin, his wet clothes clung to his body. His face was hidden in the darkness, but his eyes shone brightly for a brief moment, sending a chill down my spine. I screamed loudly, retreating back, and the figure disappeared immediately, as if it had never existed. Only the sound of the rain falling heavier and heavier remained. I knew that I could not sit still any longer. I had to find a way out before I was pushed to the limit. I rushed out into the hallway, the flashlight shaking and shining on the water stains on the floor. I was shocked to realize that rain was seeping through the ceiling, forming small puddles. But the strange thing was that in each puddle, the reflection was not my image, but different faces, all of me in terrible states. Some were purple, some bloody, some lifeless. All of them followed me as I walked. The sound of the rain suddenly became louder, echoing like a pounding on the door. I turned around, and the main door shook violently, as if someone was trying to break it from outside. I held my breath, gripping the flashlight tightly, waiting. But then the banging stopped. replaced by a soft whisper coming through the crack of the door. A low voice that sounded exactly like mine. It said that I shouldn't go out because it was scarier outside than inside. I shivered, not knowing whether to believe it or not. I decided to leave the door, going deeper into the house. In the flickering light, I saw the stairs leading to the attic. A cold wind blew down from there, carrying the sound of rain hitting the roof. I climbed each step. The sound of rain echoed closer, as if it were echoing in my head. When I got there, I saw a small window open slightly. I walked over and looked out. The sight almost made me collapse. In the rain, the yard was full of people standing motionless, all looking straight at me. The flash of lightning illuminated dozens of faces that looked like mine, but distorted, cold, and lifeless. They all smiled, a strange smile. The sound of the rain mixed with the echoing laughter, creating a creepy sound. I was stunned. My legs couldn't move. I could only stand there, looking down, feeling the cold truth that I was being surrounded from the inside out. And I understood. The sound of the rain tonight was no longer the sound of nature, but had become a funeral song in one of the most terrifying rain sounds I had ever heard. The attic was dark, the dust thick and thick, making it hard to breathe. The rain pounded on the roof like a funeral drum. I swung the weak beam of my flashlight around the room, discovering old wooden boxes piled in the corner. I walked over and shakily opened one of them. Inside were tattered notebooks, the paper yellowed and soaked with a musty smell. I opened one, flipped through the first pages, and my whole body went numb. The scribbled lines in it described in detail every moment I had just experienced. From the initial knocking, to meeting the man who looked exactly like me, to the endless hallway and the circle of blood. Each word seemed to expose every fear I was trapped in. I threw the notebook down, but dozens of others began to open by themselves, each page turning violently, making a rustling sound like the howling wind. I trembled, my heart pounding, as I realized that my fate was already written in these rotten pages. A cold wind blew, extinguishing the flashlight. I rushed to the corner of the room, trying to turn it on, but no light came. In the darkness, I heard a whisper, like hundreds of voices whispering. I listened and realized they were rereading the words in those notebooks. I was surrounded by the sound of my own life story, read aloud by ghostly voices. Suddenly, a loose sheet of paper flew straight at me, sticking to my face. I pulled it down, and in the flash of light from outside, I read a trembling line. "You will die immediately after reading this sentence." I panicked, threw the paper away, but it immediately reappeared in my hand. I crumpled it, but found it intact on the floor, over and over again. I screamed, rushing towards the stairs to escape the attic, but the door was gone, replaced by a cold wall. In desperation, I pounded on the wall, my hands bleeding, but to no avail. Papers flew around me, touching my face, my hands, like insects. Each page recorded my death in various ways, from being swallowed by darkness to being torn apart by distorted versions of myself. I trembled and screamed, but the sound of wind and paper turning drowned everything out. A figure slowly emerged in the middle of the attic. In the flickering light, I saw it was me, but thin, with deep black eyes. He held a notebook and read aloud, his voice echoing throughout the room. With each word he read, my body ached as if being pierced. I knelt down, clutching my stomach, sweating profusely. I tried to scream for him to stop, but he only continued, his voice getting louder and louder, drowning out the sound of the rain on the roof. when he reached the last sentence, I felt an invisible hand squeeze my throat. I collapsed, my vision fading. But then suddenly, everything went silent. Darkness enveloped me. I opened my eyes again and realized I was still alive, lying among the scattered notebooks. But on the first page of the notebook, right next to my hand, there was a new line written, "This is only the beginning." I understood that I was trapped in a living creepy where I was both the protagonist and the victim, and I could never escape. I opened my eyes after a brief faint and suddenly realized that I was no longer in the attic. The surrounding space was dark, only the small campfire flickering in front of me, the chirping of insects, the wind blowing through the trees, and the distant hoot of an owl. I looked around. The forest was pitch black all around, so tall and dense that even the moonlight could not penetrate. I trembled, realizing that I had just been thrown into another nightmare, where I was camping alone in the deep forest. I didn't remember how I got here, nor was I prepared. Beside me was only an old backpack, in which were a few miscellaneous items. I pulled them out, but they were all useless. A rusty knife, an empty lighter, and a tattered notebook. I opened the notebook, and my heart froze when I saw that the pages inside also recorded every moment of me. Even the fact that I was sitting by the campfire at this moment. The last line trembled as if it had just been written. "Do not leave the circle of light of the fire." I shivered and raised my head. The darkness around me was so thick, so silent that I could hear my heartbeat. The campfire flickered, its flickering light creating distorted shapes on the tree trunks. I heard rustling footsteps from the forest, slow but steady, as if someone was walking around me. I held the rusty knife tightly in my hand, my eyes never leaving the darkness. But no one stepped out. Only the sound surrounded my mind, as if trying to drown me in panic. A soft laugh rang out from afar, then stopped. I turned around repeatedly, cold sweat soaked my back. Suddenly, from the darkness, bright eyes appeared. I gasped, my hands trembling. But when the firelight shone in, I froze. It wasn't a beast, it was me, another version of me with a pale face, white eyes, standing motionless in the middle of the trees. I screamed, backed away, but when I blinked, he was gone as if he had never been there. I panicked, sat closer to the fire, clutching the knife. The words from the notebook echoed in my head. "Don't leave the circle of light of the fire." I tried to keep the fire burning, throwing dry branches around, but the flames grew weaker and weaker, as if being sucked dry by something invisible. Footsteps sounded again, closer this time, circling around me like a deadly dance. I heard whispers from many directions, all my voice, but echoing and distorted. They repeated the same sentence. "You can't escape." I was pushed to the edge of despair, my eyes constantly following the darkness. And then another version of me slowly walked out of the forest, then another, then many more. They surrounded me, all of them with distorted faces, their eyes lifeless. The campfire finally died down. The darkness swallowed me, and in an instant, dozens of icy hands reached out from the void, squeezing my body. I screamed, but my screams only echoed back from the forest, as if the darkness itself was mocking me in that moment. I understood that I was trapped in a nightmare loop, where even when I thought I was camping alone, I was actually sharing the darkness with countless other distorted versions of myself. And I knew this night would never end. When the darkness of the deep forest fell and dozens of invisible hands tightened around me, I thought I was swallowed. But when I opened my eyes, I found myself lying on the cold brick floor. The musty smell rushed straight into my nose, and when I raised my head, I realized that there were no more trees or campfires around me, but only the cracked walls of an old, dilapidated house. The house was large, the roof leaked, the wooden floor was moldy, and everything was bathed in a cold, dim blue light. I stood up, trembling, feeling heavy as if countless eyes were watching my every move. The wind whistling through the broken window sounded like a moan. I walked slowly down the long hallway where old paintings hung on the walls. But every time the weak light passed by, I realized that the face in the painting was no longer intact. The eyes in the painting looked straight at me, a crooked smile on my mouth. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself, but my whole body was covered in goosebumps. Suddenly, a painting shook violently, fell to the floor, the frame shattered. I bent down to look, but under the torn painting was another drawing. My face, with hollowed-out eyes. My heart pounded. I turned to run, but the hallway behind me had disappeared, replaced by a solid wall. I was forced deeper into the house. The door to the left room opened slightly. A creaking sound echoed. I pushed the door open, and a bedroom appeared. On the bed was a body wrapped tightly in a blanket, breathing steadily and wheezing. I moved closer, gently pulling the blanket. The face below stunned me. It was me, but my face was ashen, my white eyes wide open. My heavy breathing stopped as soon as that gaze met mine. I screamed, rushed out, but the door slammed shut behind me, locking me in. The room darkened, only a dim light coming from a corner. I heard a whisper from the wall, a voice that sounded exactly like mine, repeating the same sentence. "You're dead. You just don't know it yet." I backed away, hitting the old mirror placed against the wall. The image in the mirror did not reflect me, but a tall, thin figure with a blurry face. The figure raised its hand, and I felt a chill run down my spine, as if it had just touched me. I turned my head, but there was no one behind me, only cold air surrounding me. Footsteps echoed from the ceiling, then spread throughout the room. The wooden ceiling shook violently, dust flew everywhere. I panicked, looking for a way out, when the opposite wall slowly opened, revealing a spiral staircase leading down into the darkness. With no other choice, I rushed down. The footsteps continued to chase above, getting faster and stronger. I ran, my breath quickening, my heart almost jumping out of my chest. When I reached the end of the stairs, I fell into a large basement. The flickering candlelight illuminated dozens of doors lining the basement, all of them half closed. I stepped back, my heart pounding, as one by one the doors began to open. From within, figures stepped out, all of them me, but each with a different, horrific wound. Some were covered in blood, some had no eyes, some had their necks broken to one side. They all approached me at the same time, muttering something incoherent. I screamed, reeling in panic. In that moment, I understood that this house was not just a shelter, but a soul-trapping machine. It was haunted, heavily haunted by countless versions of myself, all trapped in a cycle of death. And now, it was my turn to be swallowed up, becoming part of this endless nightmare. I stood frozen in the middle of the basement as the doors opened and countless versions of me stepped out. They all came towards me, their faces distorted, their eyes lifeless, making me suffocate. I backed away, but my back hit the cold wall. I screamed for help, but the sound only echoed from all around, mixed with my own distorted whispers. In a moment of panic, The flickering candlelight illuminated the lines of writing carved into the wall. I reached out to touch them and realized that each line was a retelling. A story about me, about what I had been through from the beginning until now. I shivered when I read more closely, because next to each line was another name. James, Michael, Daniel, David, all were names of people I had never met. But the lines clearly stated that they had died here, in this house, in the same way I was facing. I was utterly bewildered, because that meant what I was experiencing was not just an illusion, but a repetition of tragedies that had happened. This was no longer a horror dream, but true stories, stories that had really existed. I groped to read on, my hands trembling as I followed each character carved into the wall. There was a passage about a person being pulled down from a circle of blood. A passage about a person who saw himself in a mirror and then disappeared forever. Each sentence was like a sentence carved into stone, unchangeable. I stepped back, my heart filled with fear. I no longer saw only versions of myself, but also clearly heard the cries for help of those who had died before. Their voices echoed in the dark dungeon, begging for release. In that moment, one of the figures stepped closer, his face gradually becoming clear. It was a strange man, not me, but his eyes were filled with despair. He opened his mouth, and I heard a trembling voice. We all thought we were the first, but the truth is that this house always finds a new victim to continue the story. Then he disappeared into the darkness, leaving only the echo of his voice like a curse. I trembled, staring at the wall where the words continued to be engraved, as if an invisible hand was writing right before my eyes. A brand new line appeared, still soaked in blood. The next victim is you. I froze, my whole body numb. The distorted versions of me kept coming closer, the encirclement growing tighter. I rushed into the middle, trying to squeeze through, but their cold hands grabbed me, pulling me down to the ground. Just when I thought I would be torn apart, everything suddenly disappeared. The basement became empty, just me and the wall covered with thick writing. But now, between the old lines, I saw my name carved, along with a faint line, dead. I touched it with trembling hands, tears welling up in my eyes. I understood that I had become a part of this cycle of death, like those who had gone before me, and my story would continue to exist here, as one of the most haunting true stories. I collapsed, my body shaking, my heart filled with despair. I no longer knew what was real and what was imaginary. I only knew that anyone who stepped into this place would become another name carved on the wall, another soul imprisoned forever. And now, it was my turn. I knelt before the engraved wall, my vision blurred in the darkness. My name appeared clearly, along with the words dead. I trembled as I touched it, hoping it was just an illusion, but my finger touched a deep engraving. Blood oozed from my fingertips as if it were being sucked by the wall itself. At that moment, the flickering candles around the cellar all went out, leaving me in the pitch black. I heard moans from the far corners, gradually turning into screams. I turned around, trembling, and before my eyes were distorted figures. All of them were previous versions of me, people who had died in this house. But this time, they were no longer silent like before. Their eyes were red, their faces twisted with hatred. They walked towards me, hands outstretched, trembling with anger. I backed away, my heart pounding, my mouth stammering a plea. But they didn't listen, only whispering in unison. You made us die, now it's your turn to pay. I choked, trying to explain that I was also a victim, that I didn't want this to happen. But every word fell into the void. Those souls didn't need a reason, because to them, I was the one who continued the cycle, and their deaths were the price I had to bear. I was forced back against the wall. Dozens of cold hands touched my skin, leaving burning marks. I screamed loudly, struggling in despair. But their invisible power was too great. One of them moved closer, most clearly in the dim light. It was an old version of me, his face full of wrinkles, his eyes filled with hatred. He spoke in a hoarse but powerful voice. "You were warned, but you still entered. It was your stubbornness that continued this chain of pain. Now you must pay for all of us." I collapsed, tears streaming down my face. I begged for his forgiveness, but his face only showed a twisted smile. The cellar shook. The wall engraved with my name began to bleed, each letter glowing red. I was pulled against the wall, my back pressed against it, unable to move. I felt each line of hot engraving burn into my skin. Screams echoed around me, like a chorus of hatred. I screamed in pain, but the sound only made them laugh louder. I understood that I was no longer a victim, but had become the target of revenge for the souls trapped before Dot in the last moment. I saw the image of the first man I had ever met at the threshold. The one who claimed to be me from the future. He stood in the corner of the cellar, his eyes sad but cold. He nodded slightly, as if confirming that everything was settled. I wanted to ask, to call for help, but my throat was choked, unable to make a sound. The other souls rushed at me, enveloping me. I felt the coldness piercing my bones, my soul being torn to pieces. I screamed one last time, but my scream only merged with the echoes of countless other voices. Voices that had echoed in this house from generation to generation, and then darkness swallowed everything. I didn't know if I was alive or dead, but when I opened my eyes, I found myself standing in front of the same door where the man had warned me to leave. The only difference was that this time, I was the one standing at the door, my face old, my eyes full of regret. And I whispered to the person who had just come in, "I am you from the future. Please leave this place now before it's too late." The loop began again, like one of those revenge stories that never ended.